All right, we have been talking about population growth, or really lack thereof, here in Michigan for a while. And just to give you a sense of where we are, between the years 2000 and 2020, Michigan saw the second slowest population growth in the U.S., just behind West Virginia. So last June, Governor Whitmer created the Growing Michigan Together Council. She gave them 6 months to come up with a series of recommendations for the state to try to figure out how to grow the population here in Michigan. The report was turned in on Thursday morning. Here are some of the recommendations coming out of that. Developing regional public transit, offering students 2 years of tuition-free post-secondary education, financial incentives to attract new workers, and as for education, a new study to see the best possible skills for students that they need to thrive in a future economy. We really wanted to take a look a little bit deeper at some of these recommendations. So with me now is State Senator Darren Camilleri, who is on the council. Senator, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thank you.
All right, before we dive into the findings and the recommendations that the council had, let's talk a little bit about process. You had 6 months to do this. You had a little bit of an extension at the end. It is a pretty big question to tackle in 6 months. Can you tell us how many meetings there were and how it kind of all worked when it came to groups and the discussions?
Initially, there were only a set of maybe 5 to 6 meetings on the schedule, but given the time constraint and the extension, they ended up adding additional meetings across the time frame to not only ensure that we were studying this topic in depth and getting a good academic base that we could work from, but that then we could talk at length about the different opportunities we could push for solutions. And I think that that is where the recommendations landed, where we have 3 broad categories of strategies, talking about investing in our talent and keeping people here, putting us on a pathway to be the innovation hub of the Midwest, and investing in our education. And then from there, a whole set of tactics on how to implement those ideas. It's now our turn in the legislature to do something about it, and I'm hopeful that when we return, this will be part of the ongoing discussion that we take in Lansing.
All right, let's go ahead and look at some of these categories. And one of the things that popped up was regional transit. And I think for a lot of people, they kind of throw their hands up and say, well, this has been the problem that we haven't been able to solve here in Metro Detroit for a very, very long time. What were some of the new conversations that came out of this that you think that could actually move the needle finally on a regional transportation system?
I think when we look at the data, it shows that high growth states are areas that have invested heavily in their public transit. And so we see our ridership in public transit in Michigan is one of the lowest in the country. And all we have to do is invest more in that area and see some significant growth in not only Metro Detroit, but across the state to help support workers, because young people like myself want to live in areas that have easy access to public transportation. Yes, we drive our cars and we're excited about that too, but being able to hop on a train or a bus to get anywhere in the city and walk and have that density that makes walkable, livable communities really attractive is what we're seeing as some of the places across the country that are high growth areas.
So how do you get at that? Is there a new RTA that's going to be formed? I mean, I guess people say, all right, we know that there's a need. How are we going to actually start to do this?
I do think that part of the discussion should be around reopening the RTA. That's my own personal opinion. I know we've seen it a few times in the past where we talked about a large regional transit system. It failed at the ballot previously. I'd like to, as a legislator, potentially open up that conversation again, because we know that bigger transportation systems that include more communities are the way that we should go. That's my take from this report, and I think that we should go down that route as much as we can.
All right, Darren, let's talk about education right now. Talking about giving 2 years of tuition-free post-secondary education. That was one of the big recommendations that came out of that. People will hear, and again, going back to transit funding, where does this funding come from, and how do you think that that kind of post-secondary opportunity is going to improve outcomes here in Michigan?
One of the things that can make us unique is that we can invest in a pre-K through 14 system, so early childhood all the way through those first two years of post-secondary. We obviously know that we need more money to do that, but if we were to provide those services, we become distinct across the country. We're one of the few that has actually invested in that way. How do we get there? That is the outstanding question that we are all grappling with. When you look at reports like the School Finance Research Collaborative, something that a lot of academics and policymakers have been aiming towards for the last several years, it has called for higher per pupil amounts, but does not exactly touch the higher education piece. I think we need to do both at the same time. And it is going to require a sobering conversation about revenue, whether that means finding existing revenue in the system that is there. Can we find efficiencies and find ways to scale down some of the operations and consolidate some of those opportunities there? But also it means finding new revenue to sustain and grow. I'm open to any and all conversations and ideas. I know that was not exactly what we got out of this council discussion because we didn't want to prescribe the tools that we would need to take on as a legislature, but that is now our task. How can we grow that revenue to sustain a larger education system and provide equity within it as well?
Hey, what about governance? Did you talk about that at all in terms of the State Board of Education, the state superintendent, if that should be folded under the governor's purview?
There were some discussions around that, and I know that that's been an ongoing discussion for years, regardless of who the governor is. There is a disconnect between how the current Department of Education runs and how it is totally independent from the governor. There are some pros as to why that is. There's also some cons to how that system plays out. I've seen, an approach that I'd like to take is finding ways to bring those two departments together between the governor and the department itself. I don't know what that will fully look like, but it will require a vote of the people because that would require us changing the Constitution in order to make those amendments. I do think that should be part of the discussion because it could provide for some operational efficiencies as well as some long-term planning where governors can set visions, but if they're not in charge of the department that can execute on that vision, it does create some challenges.
One of the other things I mentioned in this is also financial incentives to attract new workers. And let me ask you again, when we look at, finding the funding to boost education, finding some funding for transportation, funding to attract new workers, what is the conversation going to be to talk to the voters in Michigan to say we are going to have to spend money or taxes might have to be raised to be able to tackle this population issue?
One of the things that I always bring to the table when we talk about revenue is that we should look for operational efficiencies within our current system. That is the first place to start. But outside of that, we need to take a comprehensive look at who is paying taxes, how they're paying those taxes, and are there loopholes that we can close today that don't impact regular people. I believe that there are, after serving the legislature for 7 years. We've seen opportunities where businesses can take advantage of Michigan's tax code, and maybe that's an area to start. And so my first line of thinking on this is how do we raise revenue without impacting people directly? I think that there are some chances to do that today. I'd like to take a broader look at that before we start thinking about higher taxes for our residents. And I do think that we can find significant revenue just from already existing structures that could be changed or modified when it comes to businesses and loopholes and tax exemptions that are already on the books.
All right, State Senator Darren Camilleri, we're going to be watching on this. The reports are very, very good. It's going to be what the action is coming up next, and we look forward to having those conversations with you. Thanks for joining me today.
So much.